Welcome to the Breadwinners, the podcast where we talk about what it actually takes to lead and earn when the world keeps shifting under your feet. I'm Rachael Lowell. For nearly 20 years, I've been coaching leaders at top-tier institutions and Fortune 500 companies through massive, complex change. But what's happening now feels different. The pace, the pressure, the way it spills over into people's work and their lives. We keep calling it burnout, but most of what I'm seeing isn't exhaustion. It's something closer to what some are calling quiet cracking. Too many threads, too many choices, too much noise about where to begin, and instead of movement, paralysis. The framework I use with my clients is called SHIFT. It names 5 dimensions that shape how we lead under pressure: security, horizon, impact, fluidity, and ties. Most of us are naturally suited for 1 or 2. But when the pressure spikes, the imbalance shows. And that's where Farrah Bostic is extraordinary. She doesn't just cut through the noise. She names what's underneath it. She's the founder of The Difference Engine, a consultancy that helps companies get radically clear on what their audiences actually want. She's known for asking precise questions and telling the truth even when it's uncomfortable. She's also the creator and host of Crosstabs, a podcast about people, data, and power. In today's episode, we talk about her story and her path. We talk about how she cut through the noise to find her own clarity. And we talk about what it takes to stay focused and fluid at a time when even the best adapters are hitting their limit. Let's dive in. Farrah, I've been so looking forward to this. You and I share a curiosity, I think, about the why behind the choices that people make, why we work the way we do, why we vote the way we do, why we react the way we do. Crosstabs, your podcast, tries to unpack that in the bigger picture. And that's the kind of work that I do with folks in the workplace. Do you think that if we don't understand each other's why, it's sort of impossible to move forward together? So let's start. We start with all of our guests at the beginning. What were the ideas that you had about work and earning and existing and living in the world? What did you grow up with?
I'm from Portland, Oregon originally. Well, it's a lovely place to be from. It's a lovely place to grow up, lovely place to raise kids. It's also kind of limited in terms of the number of large companies that are there and the economic opportunity that might be there. My dad has a kind of interesting, twisty background of his own. He studied philosophy of science, did a National Science Foundation scholarship to Duke, decided not to defend his dissertation in the end, so just shy of his PhD. Wrote it, but didn't sit for it. Taught for a little bit at Lewis and Clark College in Portland and started working in a variety of companies until he found himself working in the 80s version of high tech, which was mostly hardware startups in what was then referred to as Silicon Forest. So the whole kind of Northern California to Seattle I-5 corridor. You had Hewlett Packard and Microsoft and Intel and Mentor Graphics and all kinds of companies. And he worked for several of them over his career. And the thing about that is, you know, it meant he changed jobs quite a bit. Sometimes those companies would go bust or get acquired or have a major change of ownership or management, and he'd have to go find something else to do. And when I was in, I guess, probably high school, he was laid off from InFocus Systems. They made LCD displays and overhead projectors and things like that. And he started working for himself for a little while. He was installing local area networks in mid-sized businesses around the Portland area. And one of his clients was an advertising agency called Wieden & Kennedy. They are kind of famous for their work on Nike over many, many years, among other big brands. But they used to be in this little warren of buildings in a block in Southwest Portland downtown. And he was, you know, in and out of the founders' offices and overhearing conversations and in the halls. And he came home one day and said, I think this would be a great job for you. And frankly, I hadn't really processed that there were people who made ads. And so this was sort of a novelty idea to me in the first place. He would bring home flyers he found on kind of cork boards in the hallways and that kind of thing. But the kind of selling point was he said, they use the F word a lot there. And I was like, Okay.
Other than that, though, what was the trust?
I think what he liked about it was that it felt like a freewheeling, candid, collaborative, risk-taking place. I have ADHD. He had ADHD. We're very similar. I think that he just thought, this is a great place where you will never be just like, here, sit at your desk and do this work. That sort of took me on a little bit of a path. And so when I was in college at University of Oregon, they have an advertising program that used to or still does, I'm not sure, sits in the journalism and communications department. I did that degree as well as a political science degree because the credit hours worked out. You could do both at the same time. And again, ADHD kid, my parents intuited that overprogramming was the right way to go. I actually wound up getting a creative assistant job, quasi-internship, that's a whole other story, at Wieden & Kennedy one summer. And so I got a sense of what that culture was all about. And he was right. He was right. That was the right cultural fit for me. And I think when I first heard about the place, I guess I kind of imagined I'd be an account exec or something like that. But in the program at University of Oregon, I had a good luck of having an instructor named Ann Maxwell, and she sort of pulled me aside and said, I think you should be a copywriter. And so I was a creative assistant. I started out as a copywriter. And over time, as I graduated and got my first jobs out of college, I discovered a couple of things about myself. And one is that if I wanted to continue to like writing, I probably should not write ads. That kind of process of writing was really not very fun for me. It was a lot of like writing in the style of the creative director you reported to, writing in the style that the brand had decided was right for it. I remember getting a brief one summer that was for the Microsoft network. There was early internet radio on MSN and AOL, and there was a show called CompuTalk, which was sort of modeled on the TV show Car Talk, you know, click and clack, the Clampett brothers talking about what's wrong with your car, but also life. And I had to write a live read radio ad for it. And the tone given to me in the brief was folksy, like Motel 6, we'll keep the light on for you kind of stuff. I think it was the first time I heard who Garrison Keillor was. And I was like, okay, like this is extremely strange. So if I just pepper the copy with the words folks and stuff, then you'll be happy. And that was that. So that was one thing I learned, was that my interest in writing was not really in writing ads. The other was that I couldn't really turn off the brain that's going, well, but why am I writing this? And what is it for? And who are they trying to persuade? And what are they trying to persuade them to do? And how will that help their business? And can they pull it off? All of those kinds of further and further up the chain kind of questions were the questions I would ask my bosses and colleagues. They weren't thrilled to have a copywriter asking them those questions. So I moved out of copywriting into brand strategy. And then it was sort of the 2001, 2002 period where the ad business really got knocked around by the first dot-com crash and 9/11 and the, you know, MCI WorldCom and Enron and all of that stuff. I was living in LA, and I decided I was done with all of that I had never really meant to live in LA, that I didn't really like my boyfriend, that I didn't really like my job. And so I quit all of those things. And I came to New York and went to law school. I was a debate kid in high school. I had been told all through high school and college that, like, well, you like to argue, so why don't you go to law school? I don't know that that's really the reason you should go to law school, but I did. I think some of it was I was laid up for a few days after having wisdom teeth pulled, and I just binged The West Wing over like 3 or 4 days.
Friends, who doesn't love that show?
And I was like, these people are all lawyers. Maybe that's what I should do. So I moved to New York. I went to Cardozo Law School. And I think it was actually really clarifying for me. I'm not a lawyer. I never sat for the bar. I don't have a license to practice. I cannot give you legal advice. But the realization that I think I had in law school was that the real value it was offering me was rigor. I started to see the similarity between briefing a bit of case law for a class and writing a creative brief in the ad agency context, that it's about investigating the situation, marshaling the facts in a particular way to make a case. And it provided me with some frameworks for thinking about these things. And so it turned out to be, I think, quite valuable for me. It also is a good place to think strategically, which is what I clearly was inclined towards. I think the other thing was, and I hope this is still true in law schools, you have to take a professional ethics class. And like, it just turned out that ethics matter quite a bit to me. Yeah. And so doing things just because we can, not because we should, and not without thinking through the consequences was kind of anathema to me as well. I think also my expectation was not ever, because of my dad's experience, that there would be job stability, that income would always be up and to the right, that career trajectories were linear plots. It just was pretty clear to me that I was going to have to roll with some punches and be adaptable.
Such a valuable lesson to learn. I've been talking to other folks on the podcast, and I think I grew up with this too, this idea of like, what's the track? Like being raised with this idea that there is a track somehow, and you got to get on it and stay on it. But one of the through lines that I hear as you're describing the early part of your career, and, you know, jump in if I'm off, but there's like a no bullshit rule. You're like, authenticity is first, you know, it's primary for you, right? And I think it sounds like what the creative brief process and this process you worked on in law school gave you an opportunity to do was actually name, here are the facts on the ground, and here's where I think the strategy should go from here. But so does that idea of like, yeah, no bullshit for me, thanks, I'm good. Like, does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I even had at one point, as I was graduating from law school, I worked with some headhunters to find the job I would take right literally after I walked on graduation. And one of them said to me that she thought that my personal brand was tough but fair-ish. And I laughed at the time because, like, I'm disinclined to play favorites, but if you really screw up, you're going to hear about it from me. I'm not going to be so fair that like you don't understand that you screwed up. But I think the no bullshit component of it is huge.
I'm with you. I also think bullshit is such a waste of time. And I think that what I saw growing up and still see often is that when people think about work culture or how they should behave in a professional setting, it's like bullshit is often built in to how to navigate it, right?
You know, the job I took right literally the day after I graduated from law school, it was a great job, but it was also a place where I started to kind of be able to name this idea that I started to refer to it as performing work.
Oh, yeah.
And this idea of not only am I expected to do my job and to be productive, and it was a kind of qualitative research consulting job where I was out in field work a week or two a month at a minimum. So often not in the office. And so then when I was in the office, it was really important to perform work, to update my boss who literally sat behind me on everything I was working on. And then there were kind of interesting, kind of funny cultural moments too, where the company had both a quantitative team and a qualitative team. The quantitative team doesn't go do primary field work. They field surveys online. So they're in the office most of the time. And we had a couple of conversations where it was like, you know, the qual people never come to the office birthday party, or they never hang out on Friday nights or whatever. And it's like, we're literally not here. Like, I don't know what more I can do for you. Or the company party where it's like, you must play this water balloon toss game. I remember saying to this young woman who was telling me that this was required, I was like, is this a condition of my employment? And she was like, well, no, but, and I was like, then I decline. Like, absolutely not. But there was also a belief that in our consulting work, we did a lot of what we called creative development research, ad testing mainly. And we had this philosophy, I guess I would say, of it's not a bake-off, it's not a beauty contest, we're not here to pick a winner. Those were all the phrases that we used to describe after we would expose these ideas to people and get their feedback, how we would talk to clients about them. And that seemed fine most of the time until I got into a meeting with a client in the liquor business who was like, yeah, okay, but which one should we run? And I tried to do the lines about, well, it's not a bake-off and whatever. And he was like, yeah, no, which one do we run? And I suddenly had this moment of clarity of like, right, why would we do anything else? Like, why would he want to know how to maximize all the ideas? He needs to pick amongst the three. The thing that I also realized is I had missed a very important question in the project, which is, what did they want their brand to be after they ran this campaign? How did they want people to see them? People don't really, or companies don't really want to do 12 focus groups in 3 countries. They don't want to do a few dozen interviews or a survey. They want answers to questions that will help them make a decision.
Yep.
And so if we're not able to give them the recommendations that will help them make that decision, we're just doing research, but like for no particular purpose. And I think that was the kind of next turning point for me on, well, why am I doing this? There's a reason that these people come to us asking for this service. We should probably dial into that and answer for that.
People really do want to make a decision. They don't want to see, longer and longer PowerPoint decks. They want to really get to the heart of what am I trying to do here and how do I do it? Well, one thing that I feel like I've seen more over the past few years as kind of our world has imploded, better term, is that people are starting to get to those questions quicker of like, what are we really doing here? Do you see that more in your work?
A lot of the conversations I've had over the last, particularly like the last 5 years, I would say, with clients have been often much more existential questions about where is growth going to come from? We often talk in our company about 3 types of growth. There's the growing for the first time, growing again after a period of stagnation, and growing back after a period of setbacks and loss. Fundamentally, those are the questions that most of our clients are actually asking us for. The objective of any marketing campaign or new product development or new audience to try to explore is they're trying to grow their businesses. And so people seem to be more willing to get down to that conversation faster as opposed to getting in the weeds of whatever the initiative or the campaign or the design is. I really thought I sort of put out a marker 2 Januaries ago. I made some predictions about what the year ahead would offer, and then the same for this year. When I looked back at the one I did at the kind of beginning of 2024, that's more or less how the year went. It felt like we were careening towards a real period of upheaval, and people use the term polycrisis, or in William Gibson's universe, it's the jackpot. And so like we're heading towards the jackpot. And that seemed to me like a good time to suggest to the types of clients we work with and that we might work with a real need for kind of scenario planning, trying to see around corners, really getting real about their business and their customer and what it is they're trying to accomplish and what the real conditions on the ground are.
Would love to just pause to hear a little bit more about your company and what you do, so that as you're telling us the strategies that you're using, we can kind of see it in context of the business you're running.
The business is called The Difference Engine. I started it in 2011. The sort of philosophy we have is that strategy without any research is guesswork, and research without any strategy that it's driving towards or helping to frame is just noise. The focus that we've had over the last 5-10 years has been really oriented around business delivery decisions. So a lot about customer experience, pricing, new products and services to be developed, ways of going to market. And then obviously also we do stuff around product design or user experience or even kind of brand campaigns. We do primarily qualitative research, but we do quantitative as well. We do a lot of workshops for our clients, trying to get them internally aligned around a roadmap of decision making that will help them execute whatever their business objective for the next year or 6 months or quarter is. So the expectation is all these previously theorized business strategies that sit on a binder on a shelf or whatever are always good, and it's just a question of execution. And I don't agree. Like the world changes and the way people interact with it evolves and conditions change. And, it's the line about everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Like, your binders are great until you actually meet some people. I think one of the things I love the most about going out and talking to people, particularly when I can be in person with them, is how swiftly they just dispense with every wishful thought clients have that are true wishful thinking and not really grounded in anything. And I love being able to bring back sort of people's real lived truths to those clients. And so that's what we do.
I love that. Do you see any commonalities among people the leaders that you work with?
My favorite clients understand that regardless of what kind of business they're in, they're delivering it to humans. And so they need to understand those people and treat them with respect. The other thing that they're interested in is also the no bullshit piece of the equation, right? They don't want to do fancy methods that get you something vague. They want to get to reality as quickly as they possibly can. I started giving a talk right before the pandemic about decision making. And the thrust of the talk was it is possible to make a good decision and not have it turn out the way you hoped. That this was revelatory enough that I was invited to come talk to a national bank in another country about this very topic. I think that is also tricky for some clients to think, but we have this perfect plan. We've spent a lot of time on it. We've developed it all. Why isn't it working? And I think sometimes it can be really hard to find out that like, it's a very pretty plan. It just isn't realistic. And it's, and so we have some who struggle with that candor, which is that they're afraid it'll make them look bad or look stupid or look unprepared. They're trying to protect their jobs and their teams and their department budgets. They know that they don't have support or buy-in from senior decision makers in the organization. So even if they came to them with this new approach or a diagnosis of the problem that wouldn't be popular internally, that they're just going to be ignored or worse. And that is a real challenge. And this is part of why we started offering the workshops, actually, was to get them internally aligned. And I could be the one to break the bad news. So it's not the chief marketing officer. It's not the head of product. It's this outside consultant that you're not going to have to talk to tomorrow at the water cooler. I think the other thing that we discovered is it's not just like in the meeting we all agree, that there is a plan for the next month at least of what everybody's going to be doing. And the other thing that we started talking about was who are going to be the champions for this, who are going to protect you from other people in the organization who think this is a waste of time, or this isn't how we did it before, or I have a better idea, or I don't know, we should keep doing what we were doing and hope it eventually works out, those kinds of folks. And then also, how do you have enough of a vision for this that the people who are going to have to execute believe that this is sincere and that they're really going to get to do this new thing or this different thing, and they're not going to be disappointed in 30 days when it hasn't immediately gloriously paid off.
Yeah. I do a lot of strategic plans with my clients. I am the consultant in the room who says the thing that people don't necessarily want to hear. The vision that you have for the future has to look at maybe the next 30 days, but you sort of have to have in the back of your mind that change is going to come at you, and it's not a judgment of what kind of a smart professional you are. It's just the reality that we're living in right now. I think a lot of leaders feel like that 5-year plan or that, that really big strategic plan with all of the bells and whistles is the way a leader shows up with vision, right? And so it's like figuring out how do we align together around what's important to us and get the work done. It's really hard for people to try to hold on to a vision without these big pictures of what's possible. It would be really silly and counterproductive, I think, for a lot of people to try to create something like that when we're changing so much on a day-to-day.
We've been trying to talk to clients about it's not a time to have a plan, it's a time to have plans and to think through the contingencies. I mean, we were doing a little bit of this before everything got nuts, and I believe that's the scientific term. And a lot of it was sort of saying, okay, you want to do this new initiative. That's great. There is a series of commitments you have to make in order for you to even begin to tell if that initiative is going to work. And also, you can't do everything. So what are you going to stop doing? Yeah. And now a lot of the conversations we have with people is around kind of contingency planning. Like, what are you going to do if in 3 months, next quarter, there's a budget reshuffle? What are you going to do if there's a CMO change? What are you going to do if they slap tariffs on your industry? Like, all of those kinds of questions now really do need to be explored before you can start putting together any kind of plan. And so really it's probably like you need 3 or 4 plans these days. I know this kind of came up in the assessment I did, but like it requires a certain amount of flexibility. Yeah. And some corporate cultures are more amenable to that than others.
Yeah. The tool that you took before coming on the podcast called the Shift Snapshot. And basically what it's looking at is 5 different things that leaders bring to the table and that organizations need to focus on. One is stability, trust, and transparency, basically psychological safety, although I'm not a huge fan of that term right now. One is this forward-facing piece that you were talking about, right? Like, how do you see what's around the corner? Then how do you tie purpose to performance? And how do you adapt to change? And then the last one's how do you collaborate and create effective connections between people? And your result was both that your strongest area is navigating change, right? Is being able to be flexible and adaptable. And that was your biggest pressure point too, is like how, even for someone who is skilled and adept at navigating change, this idea of like, where are we going is also a strong point of yours. But in today's world of constant change, the change feels like a lot, even for you. Does that resonate?
Yeah, I think it does. We've been having real kind of soul-searching conversations in the business, my partner and I, because I think we really thought that if we just pursued this, very focused effort at business development, that it would pick up. And actually what's happened is this like continuing decline trajectory since really 2021. I was talking about this with another friend of mine that, I think the speculation about were we going to have a soft landing or a hard landing that was kind of 2021. And then again in 2022 led a lot of the clients that we usually work with to hold off on spending on outside consultants and on research in general. It led them to just sort of stick with whatever campaigns that they had instead of pursuing any new strategy. And then we kind of got into 2023 and things started to look like they were improving a little bit. And then we got into an election year where everyone really freaked out. And now we're in this. It hasn't gotten better. And it has sort of led both of us who've been in this industry for 20 plus years to say, actually to get almost existential about it. Like, not only what do we need to do to help the business survive, but do we want the business to survive? Is this really what we still want to do? Is this what businesses need now? And is this how we want to spend our time? Or is there something else that we should be doing with our remaining professional years? The fluidity thing, like, it's great. It's been really helpful for a really long time. I had a job where the company got acquired and there was all this horse trading about what role I would take and where I would live and which department I would work in. And I kind of went, what? Actually, I get to decide. And I decide to quit. That's great. It's great for me. I'm super flexible and adaptable. And my joke is always like, I can always wait tables. I can always tend bar. I can always moderate a focus group. Like these are skills I will always possess. And I will always be able to make some incremental amount of money doing that. But at the same time, it's like, okay, this has been a really hard work for a really long time. And we have been expected to flex and bend with every changing trend in the industry and every new methodology and every new tool. And now it's AI and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, do I want to keep doing that? Or do I want to actually dial up the sort of purpose piece of things as opposed to the roll with the punches component of what I've been doing? So that's, it definitely spoke to me when I saw that. It's like, oh, it's the strength and the weakness. Surprise.
What I talk to people about is being able, I do think you can use the strength to address the weakness. That's a whole other conversation. And that's what I talk to folks about. The structure of how we talk about this is, what were the messages you grew up with? And when did those break? And what are you doing now? And what I'm hearing is like, you've evolved with these ideas about how work works and how to bring your most authentic, kind of purposeful self to work. And I think we're all in this point. You're naming like, we're at another transition point. We've kind of like the models that we came into the workforce believing and understanding, and I'm speaking in like this insanely broad. So like, forgive me for that. But things aren't working right now. So we're all kind of in this turning point. And that's why I've called the tool shift, because we have to have that adaptability and that ability to say this isn't working. It's got to go this way. I want to transition us to the carbo load section. You said something that really caught my attention. So our carbo load is our kind of rapid fire. Let's ask some questions of you. And you were just talking about AI and the impact it's having on us. And one of the questions that we ask all of our guests is, what do you think will always be human about the way we work?
That's a really good question. My belief about human beings is this. We are not, this is the phrase I like to use, we are not social endocrine systems running around in meat suits trying to get laid so that we can make more social endocrine systems. I know that is what most of the guys who work in high tech believe. They're wrong about this. And the way that I know that is that there's 7 billion of us or whatever now. And that means that we deliberate together, we collaborate together, we trust each other, we build social groups and institutions, we communicate via written and spoken language, we make art, like we do all of these things that are not strictly necessary to the project that they think humans exist for. And, there's a lot of interesting research that have been done by Levine and others about our kind of trust defaults that it's seen as a bug instead of a feature, but I don't agree. I think our kind of tendency to believe other people are telling us the truth. First of all, we're right about that more often than that we're wrong, even though we're not very good at detecting when someone is lying to us. But also most of the time, most people aren't lying about most things. So it's probabilistically fair to assume that people are telling you the truth because most of the time they are. Just last week, I'm going into the city on Thursday. I posted on LinkedIn. I'm coming into the city. All I have is dinner plans. If you want to meet up during the day, let me know. And I've got 3 coffee and lunch dates lined up. People want to be around other people.
Yeah.
I think that people want to tell stories. I think that people want to have their stories heard. And I think that those things are always human and are necessary for everything. I think they're necessary for deliberative governance and they're necessary for building products and services. And I think we're just going to kind of travel through this period in the desert where we're being forced to do things where that's not important or that the people who are in charge think that that's not important. And I think that that just is never true for very long. And it's never true at all, but they can kind of force it for a little while. And then people will say, no, I don't want that. I actually want to be around other people in real time, experiencing other people's perspectives and lives and ideas and just the sound of their voices. And so those are the things that I think you can't change that. And what that means for what an office looks like, I don't know. But maybe we won't have those, but we'll have more coffee shops. I don't know.
Right. JP Morgan just built what they're calling a monument to work. Did you hear about
Oh my gosh, I haven't heard about this.
I don't know what. So they're trying to kind of counteract the work from home trend, obviously, but so that no one's going to want to go home ever. I don't know. It was a really interesting thing to see on LinkedIn. That's another baton I will share. I will link to. I was like, what the hell is this? But yeah, I love that. I think that is so spot on. Speaking of getting folks together, what was the last in-person work event where you were like, wow, this is really nailing that human part? This is really engaging us in the way that we need to be engaged in person.
This is a little bit of a double-edged one. I recently did some in-person creative workshops with consumers around a particular category that's not really established yet in the U.S. market. And it was, first of all, just for me, great to be in a room with 12 strangers and asking them to engage in thought experiments and creative exercises and all of those things. I find that extremely affirming about other humans because people generally are willing to play along and are willing to kind of park that sense that you get after about the age of 11 or 12 where you start to think that you're not creative anymore. Like little kids will all tell you artists and 13-year-olds will not. And adults won't. And it felt really meaningful to be with them and to have them talk to each other as much as to me. But yeah, I was struck by how self-aware actually people were. And I started to wonder a little bit if that's not because we've all had to spend a little too much time with ourselves.
Oh, I absolutely think it is. Yeah. And that could be part 2 of this conversation. I think people have had to come to terms with themselves in a way that they didn't need to before. And I think that shows up, in terms of what people share, what they don't share. I think what people are willing to see as a good reason for doing something versus not a good reason for doing something. We're almost at our close, but we have one question that I think would be really fun to ask you, which is, who is a breadwinner you'd like to break bread with? So someone you'd like to learn from, you'd like to grill about how they work, or someone you would like to pitch a partnership with. Anyone come to mind?
The people who come to mind are probably not altogether very famous. Some of this might actually be a little bit of time travel. Sadly, Dan Wieden, one of the co-founders of Wieden & Kennedy, passed away, I think, last year. I would love to not be the annoying creative assistant and instead be, an adult talking to him about how he built that business and what he thought there's a lot of stuff that sort of passed down as folklore about that business, but I'd like to find out how much of that's real and how much of that's sort of a retcon, after the fact. That's what it was always the plan. And I would like to know what were the points where he thought it wasn't going to work and how he and they carried on despite that.
Oh, I love that answer. Farrah, thank you so much for joining us. We're just thrilled to have had you here on the show. Can't wait to continue the conversation. Everyone go check out Crosstabs and the Difference Engine, and looking forward to another conversation soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachael.
This has been the Breadwinners podcast. I'm your host, Rachael Lowell. The show is produced by Rachael Lowell and Rachel Sklar. Technical production by Ron Pissarro. Music by Hannah Baki. With gratitude for support from Ruth Ann Harnish. The Breadwinners was founded in 2019 by me and Jennifer Owens. The Breadwinners is a co-production between Smart Friends Network and Reworking Leadership. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.